2021, and that will be at 6:30 p.m. Following a quick school committee meeting that is personnel only. Working through the conversation, just a quick hello and just to share my format. I'll be sharing some information, looking for your feedback, and looking to do these in the future so we can continue to inform our work. If you want to ask a question, please feel free to raise your hand. And as information comes through, we're also streaming this with our partners at Lexikeet so that our folks who don't speak English as their native language can access this through other means. And so if you hear some delays, I'm trying to pace things for interpretive purposes. Again, if you have a question and you're a participant on this screen, feel free to raise your hand and we'll bring you in to answer any questions you may have. So as a springboard to conversation, here are some key items that have been shared in different spaces to be considered for our district mission and vision. It may be ambitious, but I'm curious how we can get to a place where we have less goals connected to the mission and vision so that we can do things well. Measure the effectiveness of those efforts and then modify them as needed. So some draft work that was done pre-COVID and some work had been done. There was a Lewiston Listens tour. There were some questions asked, some things that were gathered. And I think that feedback should not be discarded. I think it was good feedback. And in the world of COVID, I think all the feedback we can get, the better, where it's more of a challenge to get people to gather in person. So the draft mission from the pre-COVID work was, as it shows on the screen, Lewiston Public Schools strives to create an environment which will provide opportunities for all students to develop intellectually, physically, and emotionally, which in turn will lead the students to better understanding of themselves, their fellow person, and the world around them. The draft vision from pre-COVID work was a legacy of substantial, enduring, and continuous learning. So the question we land with is, how do we go about establishing goals connected to our mission and vision? And the examples I showed you were drafts from pre-COVID work. So those are not finalized, those have not been adopted, but we want your input on those. I have heard and experienced so many goals that we sometimes lose focus. What do you feel is appropriate? What's the number of goals that you think we can work on to meet the needs of our students? How much can we implement? And then how do we go about that? Measure it, reflect on it, excuse me, refine and make decisions on all at one point. I'm certainly open to feedback at this point. And if I see a hand, I would certainly bring you into the webinar so you can contribute. But you can also email or share other items. Let's see, it looks like we have a hand. Don't think I can bring them in, Dave. Do you want to do that? That's fine.
Gary, you have permission to talk.
Kira, your hand's up. You're all set if you'd like to share.
Thank you. Originally, it didn't show unmute, so I didn't have the ability.
No problem.
In terms of goals, typically for an individual, 1 to 3 goals is manageable. And I would imagine that if we're able to sort of set up kind of subcommittees of people who are only focused on a single topic, then that committee could probably take up 1 to 3 goals. I don't think for the school committee more than about 5 kind of subgroupings at a time is doable, which would max us out at 15 goals, but those would be within 5 kind of areas. So each group of people would take up 1 to 3 goals directly related to their area, and we could probably manage about 5 different areas at a time, I would kind of suggest.
I like that line of thinking. Thank you. So with that feedback, that's very helpful. So it sounds like one piece of feedback is to frame some of the goals, at least in draft form, and have subcommittees work on each of those, key components of our mission and vision, and then have subgroups work on goals around each of those core areas. Thank you, Kiara. So as far as process goes, the last time we visited this work pre-COVID, some questions were asked, and they included, what do we do well? What are some things you would like to see kept in place? What are we not doing as well as we'd like to? What are some things you feel we could go without? What are some hopes you have for the future of our students while attending school here? Any other input? And again, we'll be taking input on these very questions, and we are looking for your feedback. This will not be the only opportunity. I imagine this work around our mission, vision, and goals will take the better part of the early part of the school year, if not lead into about mid-year. And so when we're back to school and people are not on vacations, we'll start up these groups and get some more input. But just some things to think about from a process perspective. Another topic that's come up is around our relief funds. Lewiston Public Schools has received over $30 million in relief funds. Some of those things have been designated, and we're looking for other input as to how we should go about spending these dollars to support our students. So some areas that we have already been looking at and submitting for our student supports for reintegration, social emotional learning, one-time purchases, books, supplies, and periodicals, targeted interventions. And one bullet I don't have on here that I would like to mention are big infrastructure supports, things like building a more robust network for our now new, much larger volume of computer use that has been springboarded by the pandemic. Large ventilation and HVAC projects that will not only better serve us during COVID, but also support the backbone of our infrastructure for another 20 years. These major investments are quite costly. The contractors available in the supply chain can be quite tricky, but we're committed to that work to make sure we're not only improving during COVID, but we're doing everything we can to keep our schools healthy with a good backbone and bones in the future. And again, another area here, if you have any thoughts that you'd like to share now, please feel free to raise your hand to share. And again, there'll be other opportunities to do that if you'd like to. The big question of the day, with lots of news, is, are we going to return to school? What does that look like? And what are the things that we need to be thinking about? So the latest guidance is from the state of Maine, and it's currently to follow the federal level Center for Disease Control, or the CDC. The CDC issued new guidelines on July 9th. We reviewed those in-house. We still have our COVID response team that meets, and we reviewed the document and the guidelines for schools. I did put a link here in case you want to go to it, but I'm sure if you look it up on Google or any search engine, you can find the latest guidance from the Center of Disease Control. And we looked at that very carefully, and there's a lot of language in there around recommend and should, but the language has shifted. Last year, the language was required and must, and for better or worse, I'm trying to role model and also be a rule follower. And so we're going to follow the rules. The hard thing with the latest language is the rules are not, they're not spelled out as must. And at this time, for various reasons, I'm looking at a recommendation of the school committee next Monday night, actually, that masking be a personal choice. And I've taken this approach for a number of reasons. And they include what I see in our community and what I see in the workplace, what I see in grocery stores and at youth events and our parks. And I know that this will have mixed feelings for people. And some of the reasons of that recommendation is that we don't have language that tells us that we must. And because of that, I think it should be a personal choice. And that will be a pretty robust discussion, I imagine, next Monday night, the 2nd of August, where it will be an agenda item. And there's lots of thoughts around that. I will say that the governor's language, there was a press conference today where the governor shared some items, but also we have a meeting tomorrow morning with Dr. Shah to try to have a conversation with him and his team and get some more input. And I am certain that superintendents will be talking about this. This language could shift over time. We also have to build in different ways to monitor things so that we can react as appropriate. Again, this will ultimately be an ed policy decided upon by our school committee. And I see a hand from Diane. Yep. Diane, Dave's going to bring you in so you can contribute.
Hello.
You're on, Diane.
Okay. Good evening, Superintendent Langleys. I am a special education ed tech 3 at Connors. And I understand that this is all subject to change. And I understand from reading the CDC and watching Dr. Shaw this afternoon that it is a recommendation. However, I realize for privacy purposes, you cannot ask staff if they are vaccinated. We're doing it in the hopes that people who are not wearing masks are fully vaccinated. Also, elementary under the age of 12, at this time, they are unable to receive a vaccine. So I have a real concern because I really want to be full-time 5 days a week. And I just think that being proactive rather than reactive and making it a requirement for staff and students to wear a mask would be the most prudent thing to do, in my opinion. I just think it might, I'm not saying in all cases, but it might eliminate, particularly with the Delta variant that's going on, it might eliminate having to close the schools or sections of the school and quarantine again. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, thank you, Diane. I appreciate that. I'll be honest with you. I've been turning on this since the new guidance came out July 9th. And one of the things that I keep thinking about is that on June 30th, the governor lifted the mask mandate. And we've had hundreds and hundreds of students report to summer school in pretty good volumes, riding buses. And they've done all of this without masks. And I know there's a Delta variant, and we're going to be vigilant about the new information as it comes out. I'm trying to stay ahead of the game and at least let people know what I'm thinking. And I think it does warrant a robust discussion because this is not an easy one. But I do thank you for that perspective. I think that's an important one to be considering. Looks like Maggie has a hand up. Oh. Okay,
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Sorry, I have no idea how that all happened. Sorry. I just was going to ask the question about the quarantining. If someone tests positive, will anyone that they've come in contact with be required to quarantine? Will they be required to quarantine? Are we doing all of that? Or is it going to be a simpler process this year? And if I can be unpromoted to panelist, that would be awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, no, good question, Maggie. And Dave will do his best to have you jump back to attendee, although because of this format, for any of those of you watching, if you end up being a panelist, it's really about being able to, so we can hear you, but it doesn't change anything for the negative. So, but good question and good statement. The work around contact tracing will continue. However, I do think that we have come to learn more. Even as we got closer to the end of last school year, the work around contact tracing had some different language in different areas of our country, and we're looking to solidify that. We really got into that determination of who was in what amount of space and for how long, and we're looking to make sure that we have the latest, what the state's calling the standard operating procedure. And again, those guidelines as they exist are ones that we'll follow. I would plan on contact tracing existing. One of the challenges that we'll have or benefits that we'll have is we've signed up for pooled testing. We're still waiting for more information on that, but that is one tool that will allow us to test students. And I'm not certain on this, so I'm throwing out that disclaimer of I'm not certain, but there's some thinking that with pooled testing, you can then be individually tested if there's a positive. If that is the case, then you may not need to quarantine. The other thing I would note is, and this is my perspective, I'm not trying to force my will upon anyone. And I know there's a lot of mixed feelings out there. I highly encourage people to get vaccinated if that's the choice that they want to make as a family, because it does mitigate, at least statistically, it does mitigate life-threatening illness from COVID-19. I know that's not a perfect solution. I know some people are not in favor of that because of lots of factors. And I think that that's a family decision. As a school department, we will remain committed to trying to facilitate vaccinations wherever we can, even if they are connected to school. Again, not mandating it, not requiring it. It's a family choice. But if you are vaccinated and you're a close contact, at this point in time, you would not need to quarantine. So we will have that close contact quarantine work to do again this year, like last year, but some of the variables may change. We know one of them is vaccines, another is pool testing, and then the follow-up to that is what we call the Binex Now test, which is a pretty quick turnaround test where we could test individuals. And we're still working out how all those rules play together. This slide kind of touches on things I already mentioned, but just that there's a lot of language around should, recommend, and other things. It's suggestive at this point. The new advisories are coming out daily. The big shift I noticed today in the new language was that was different from July 9th was that on July 9th, it was if you are unvaccinated, you should do these things. And now they're saying whether you've been vaccinated or not, you should do these things to create another barrier. Not required, not mandatory, and that's what makes it a real challenge. Oops. The work we are doing, we are still trying to provide feedback as information becomes available. Again, this could change between now and Monday, but Monday I'll be making a formal recommendation to the school committee where they will discuss and ultimately vote on our return to school plan. But I think that you have to know that we're assembling the contingency thoughts and plans, including the here and now. And those things are going to include different mitigation strategies. Shifting gears a bit. By the way, any topic I've covered, if you'd like to raise your hand to bring up a question or a piece of feedback connected to it, you can do so at any time. Looks like a hand up from Pamela.
Go ahead, Pamela, you're all set to talk.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I guess one of my concerns with all this, and I know we have to follow HIPAA regulations or anything. So would school nurses know which staff and which students are vaccinated. And there will be somebody in the system who knows who's vaccinated or not. I know we have to follow HIPAA rules, and I know that can complicate things, but it seems that someone, from my perspective, it would be important for someone to know that information as far as if we have an outbreak or whatever that might go on.
Yeah, that's actually a great question, Pamela. Our nurses do have access to a database where vaccinated individuals are listed. And that will be a tool that we will have to use so that we're being as accurate as we can. We're trying to avoid getting into the work of gathering people's medical information or asking for cards or things of that nature. We should be able to check with people and then cross-reference that if it comes up. That's an excellent point. All right, going back to this slide, but again, if you have a question on anything, please throw your hand up and we'll do our best to answer that. Policy. One policy, we've done some policy work this summer. This happens every year. We renew and update policy language and make sure it's modernized and aligned to current law and things of that nature. One policy that came up that got some strong feedback was right toward the end of the year, there were some students at the middle school that did some work on the dress code. And some students and adults have talked about the removal of a hat and hood limitation in schools. So right now in our schools, once the bell rings and school day is going, we ask students to take off their hats and hoods. And I think there's a long-standing tradition behind that. And some people have spoken in favor of allowing them. And I think that's created a lot of mixed feelings. And so what we're trying to do at this point in time is ensure that we have a process. And so instead of changing policy this summer, because it came up right at the end of the school year, I really felt strongly that this should land back in schools where more students beyond the middle school have an opportunity to provide input, more adults in our community, more teachers, more staff have an opportunity to provide input, and really start to dig at the reasons for potential change and what, if any, change should that be. And so we're looking to have a process on that. If you have any input on that policy work around the dress code, please feel free to chime in now. Again, reach out to me or be watchful of when it's active in schools for input as a parent, community member, or staff or student, and participate in our school committee meetings as that comes up. But that's coming up down the road. Kiera, go ahead. Hold on, Dave's going to give you. Go ahead, Kiera.
Hi there. I'd just like to share that there's kind of been a cultural shift around hats. I am now 40 years old, which, although I don't feel that old, I recognize that when I was younger, I thought of people who were 40 as very old and out of touch. But I remember being in school and hats and hoods being banned. And my father was a person who he shaved his head and he always had a hat. But when he walked into even a convenience store or a grocery store, or a place like Walmart, he took his hat off. Now, when I walk into convenience stores and Walmart or the grocery store, tons of people are wearing hats in the store. So I think that recognizing that there's a larger cultural shift around hats, we no longer automatically take them off. And also recognizing that in our schools, we have hat days, whether that's as a reward or part of, a Super Bowl, fun day.
Fundraiser,
Or,
yep.
that is already something we're doing. And I don't find that those hats are interfering significantly with my teaching on those days. So I think keeping those pieces in mind, that there already is a cultural shift outside of school, and that we do have hats in the school, although not consistently, but we still teach and learn on those days without significant interruption. So I think those are things that are valuable to keep in mind.
Yeah, I think those are all excellent points. And without me leaning into where I stand on it necessarily, just to share some other things that have come up kind of on both sides of the conversation. One is that that hats and hoods are part of students' expression and culture. And Another side of that is that we want to make sure we're preparing students for the workplace. And when they go to work, they know what expectations are there. And part of the school's responsibility is to help students understand those differences. There's a number of perspectives on this. I really think it's going to be a good conversation. And Kira, thank you for chiming in. I think you made some excellent points there. And then other topics. Open this up to you. If there's anything else you'd like to provide input on this, on anything Lewiston Public Schools this evening, I'll leave it open. I'm trying to take an open book perspective to this, that you can ask me anything that you're thinking of, kind of a coffee talk like approach, where your input is certainly valuable, and sometimes people's questions that are not these topics of discussion can prompt other lines of thinking and other interests. So are there any other topics or questions that you have that you just want to throw out there that see what I can answer in the moment, or try to find for an answer as time goes on? Yeah, Maggie.
Hi, thanks. I'm gonna go back to the hats thing a second and just say
Sure.
that I don't have a super strong opinion about hats or hoods in schools or not, but I do worry about the message that's sent to students if you give them a project and say, come up with something you care about and tell us about it. And then as soon as they do, we say, oh no, you're just being stupid kids. You don't know what the real world is like. I found like that attitude, which I haven't heard anybody say, but I've seen in like Facebook comments about this topic and stuff, is really disempowering for students, and especially in middle school. This might be one of the first times they've kind of tried to stay, kind of take a little bit of a stand, or, feel the power of their own voice. And if we just kind of push it down really quickly, as I don't think you are, but I think, some people in the community are, I just really worry that that's disempowering to the students right at a time when we want to be empowering them. So I would just feel strongly that whatever the process is, it emphasizes listening to the students, working with them, trying to keep them as part of it at every step of the way, and almost to the point of putting the onus on the adults, the non-students, to have really strong reasons why we shouldn't let the students have what they want, that go beyond, oh, because this isn't the way it was done when I was a kid. And I feel like the argument about, we're preparing students for the real world, I think that Kira's point was really well taken, which is the real world has changed and is changing. And there are so many things that happen in schools that are not what happen in workplaces, and vice versa. I think a lot of workplaces are a lot more relaxed than a lot of the rules in school are already. I can wear a hat to my job if I want to, I'm sure. And so maybe teaching students when is a more respectful time or less respectful time to wear them and things like that. But that's different than a blanket rule banning them, especially when the students have said, hey, we would feel a lot more comfortable if we were allowed to do this. So just include them in the process. And I guess I lean towards listening to the students more than listening to the stodgy old adults, of which, I consider myself one of them, for sure. Thanks.
Thank you, Maggie. I appreciate that. Looks like Diane, you have your hand up.
Yes, I do. I'm sorry to be a pest. But I've heard you talk numerous times. I am, I guess, one of the nerds that watches the school board meetings.
I did too before now.
But I was wondering, you've said many times, and I certainly believe you, I'm not questioning this at all, that you would like to improve, special education. And I was just wondering, what are some ways or ideas that you have? Because working in special ed, I do think it needs improvement in some ways.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. So we have, or I inherited an audit that was taking a look at special ed. And one of the things that we found was some big inconsistencies in a few areas that I'm looking to correct. One of them was around communication. Another was around our structure for special education as it exists in Lewiston may not be the best structure for providing the necessary services for our students that need it. And the other thing that we found is that some of the language that exists in our IEPs is so inconsistent that it is hard to follow at times. And I think mostly for our families and our students. And so we've embarked on a curriculum audit to take a look at our special education and other curriculum areas. And we've also taken on an IEP audit. IEP meetings typically run in a triennial cycle, not always, but in that 3-year window, are we addressing the student needs the best way that we can, and do we have the tools and resources in place to provide those? And we're in the midst of that IEP audit right now. Some of that will last into the fall. But one of the things that I contemplate on a daily basis, Diane, and I really thank you for asking this question, is the structure that we have currently in Lewiston Public Schools adequate enough to provide the services we need to? And I don't know that the answer is yes. And we continue to review what we get for findings in these audits. But I keep defaulting back to something that I'm passionate about, is just our approach. And I'm just being fully open and honest here that I've got some feedback about different transitions for our students, especially at the very early age students, the early grades. And I was pretty disheartened about some of the input that I got, that our families were left with questions that they wanted good things for their children, but they weren't sure if the process had, all the components it really should have. The people that were providing care for those children beforehand, did they have enough input? Were they at the table? And so we're looking to clean up process and make sure that approach is there. It's incredibly important to me, but also to help facilitate a structure that will shift, I believe, over the next 12, 24 months. It takes time to do those things. I don't want to just pull the rug out, but I can say that right now, that is an area that is very high on my list of things to improve. I do think we've made some good strides as a district overall. But I do think that special education is certainly an area that we need to get better. So I really thank you for that question. Kara?
Hi there. So I wanted to share a tiny bit of information and then kind of ask a question about steps moving forward. When we initially closed for the pandemic, I took a bunch of professional development to fill my time. And in one of those, I learned that when it comes to RTI, you should have about an 80-20 ratio of students. So 80% of the students should be able to access the on-grade level curriculum, and 20% should need some level of tier 2 or tier 3 RTI in order to kind of rise up to that level. And one of the things that they said in the training was, if you're finding that ratio is reversed, either you have a problem with that teacher who is ineffective, or you have a problem with the curriculum. I haven't been an employee of Lewiston Public Schools for that whole 4 years, but I've been placed in Lewiston Public Schools, first through an outside company, then through LPS as an ed tech, then through LPS as a teacher, moving into my 5th year. And in multiple classrooms, I've seen that same kind of flipped 80-20 structure, where 80% are really needing RTI to be able to access the curriculum, and maybe 20% are accessing, what I'm supposed to be teaching at that 6th grade level standard. And if I had only seen it my first 2 years as a teacher in only my classroom, I would immediately say, what am I doing wrong? But I've seen it across many classrooms, because as a BHP, I was a one-on-one in multiple classrooms across multiple schools throughout the district. And my question is, at what point do we look at our curriculums and see if there's a mismatch between what we're teaching and what our students are ready to learn. For example, the Lucy Calkins, reading, or the Teachers College reading and writing units of study are fantastic, but they do expect a level of school readiness by kindergarten that not all of our students have, such as fine motor skills. They've already been coloring and cutting and drawing. They've already been exposed to reading and the alphabet. But when our students come in not already having those skills, it's like they're kind of behind from square one. As another example, I have had about 50% of my students in upper elementary who enter my classroom not knowing how to use basic punctuation at the end of a sentence. They'll write an entire essay, and the end of each paragraph has a period, and that's it. So those are just some things I've noticed that indicate to me that we've got a gap somewhere, and I don't know what it is, and I'm not sure how the district can address it, but I'd love to know if there's a plan around that.
Well, you bring up a number of points from your experiences, and so thank you for sharing that. I've been on a bit of an endeavor of my own as a fellow with the Maine Leadership Development Program, and this is one of the areas that we're actually looking at from a what does the research say perspective, but also some collaborative work with other educational leaders in our state, including the Department of Education. And this doesn't answer your question, and I think that it's a really complex series of things that we have to address. But the first thing I would say is, and I'm not suggesting you said this, but I would say for anyone listening, one of the concerns that I have is that we find that students struggle, and then we well-intentioned move them along and do our very best in the moment to do what we can, because maybe we don't have the resources. Maybe kids came with some pretty big gaps and it's too hard to conquer. Or as you mentioned, that 80% of kids should be able to access, tier 1, and then you have your remaining tier 2, tier 3 interventions for the other 20%. But I think that another thing that we've seen happen is we have kids that might be able to make that stretch. And because of maybe not enough structures or not enough of components for targeted interventions, one of my fears is that we graduate students who have been passed along with mediocre expectations. And that's one of the things that I want to focus in on. And how do we close the gaps? How do we make sure we're holding high expectations? But with high expectations, how do we make sure we're providing high levels of support? I'm a firm believer in every kid can do it. And I think the biggest thing, one of my biggest fears is that we graduate students who are not prepared for their full potential because we have reduced the expectations or lowered the bar. And there was a lot of talk for a lot of years when I was a principal here in the district about the graduation rate. And I'm passionate about the graduation rate, but what I wasn't passionate about was people giving kids grades so the rate looked better. But again, well-intentioned, very good people who felt pressure to pass kids. And we have to break that mold somehow of not just moving kids along if they're struggling, so we can make sure they have the skills they need to do that. And we've tried to do some of that work, and for various reasons it has failed. Reaching all the way back to the proficiency-based learning model that, quite frankly, in hindsight 2020, we just weren't ready to do. The scoring metrics weren't decipherable to families and students. Teachers did not have the time they needed to do that work well. And I bring that up for a couple of reasons. One is anything that we're going to do, and I mentioned this earlier in the goals, I want to reduce the amount of things that we're trying to do so that we take the time that it takes to do it well, and that we measure it, and then we reflect on it, and we decide if we're going to continue that way or make a shift. And that too, that we don't just grab the next shiny thing and run with it. And I say that with caution because sometimes the next shiny thing could be a really good thing. Proficiency-based learning, again, the example I shared with the 2 points was an area of teaching and learning where, if it's done well, can be quite reflective of where students are struggling, can tell us where we need to do targeted interventions, can tell us, different specific strands and information that we need to really challenge kids at a high level. And I think we've had other things that have challenged us too, with just our enrollment size and the fact that I'm not saying retention is an answer, but if we did retain more students, I don't know where they would go. And that's a real challenge we have in our district. We are trying to use relief funds to hire more people to help us with targeted interventions. We are looking at how we can provide additional supports to teachers in classrooms and get creative with schedules and try to get creative with the ways in which we intervene. But we also want to use proven methods that we know work. There's a lot of barriers, and I'm happy that we have those challenges because I still think our kids are amazing. And Kara, I've heard you speak about our kids in so many lights, and I really appreciate your passion and commitment to them to solve these kinds of problems. We're all going to have to work together on it for sure. Lisa?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so just going back to the special ed question for a minute, I've been in Lewiston, this will be my 10th year. I just really encourage you to talk to the teachers, because one of my big frustrations with the audit and what I've heard, the feedback I've heard on the audit is that I know when my group met, we had 40 minutes with the staff, the people conducting the audit, and nearly everyone in my group said 40 minutes is not long enough for us to tell you, to share our concerns. But what happened was that whatever we said in that 40 minutes was taken and they created a report based on our 40 minutes and everyone else's. And I just really feel like there's a lot of information that teachers have to share and a lot of issues to be discussed. And the surface has only been scratched. And I know that as a special ed teacher, I feel often frustrated that I feel like our voices are not heard. And I just really hope that when you start delving into the special ed issues, the positive and the negative, that you really will have an opportunity to hear from the people who are teaching those subjects and working with those students every day.
Yeah, thank you for that. I didn't realize you had such limited time with the folks that came in to do the audit. That's definitely an approach I want to use. All right, for those of you, I saw some names pop up, but so for those of you who are just joining us, we are actually at a point now where we're doing other topics, but we did discuss some policy changes with dress code and having a process around that. We discussed my thinking currently, which may shift, about returning to school. We've discussed some other issues around special education and looking for input around mission, vision, goals. So if there's anything in any of those areas or any questions you may have that are not part of those topics, we're here to take those questions in and answer as we can and at least gather that input. And for all of those of you who have asked to share something, I thank you very much. This is the kind of conversation we're hoping to have so that we can bring these things to light. Pamela.
Well, first of all, I just want to thank you for providing this opportunity to do this. So I guess one of the things, I agree with all the things you're saying, but the I think kind of like the elephant in the room too is we are now, these incoming kids are kids who some kids have only experienced education through a hybrid or at-home situation, and or students who have not had regular school for 16 months. And is there discussion among administrators, et cetera, as far as easing them in, doing more social emotional kind of stuff, building rapport within the classroom, like kind of seeing exactly where they are and accommodating for them, just understanding that we've just had basically 16 months of atypical schooling.
Yeah, excellent point. So yes, is my short answer. But to elaborate a bit, I just met with principals and directors this week, and one of the things that I asked them to do was to be communicating with all of our staff, top to bottom, that we do want to ease into the year. We do want to have some focus on social emotional learning, people's well-being, and not just the kids, but staff as well. But we want to ease into the year. I don't want for people to feel like day one, we have to hit the ground running to catch up to everything that was missed. I know there's a gap. I know that what we just did in a hybrid model was not education at its best. I know when we took off from March, I don't know, 15th or so, or 14th, maybe even 16th, but that mid-March date that we stopped coming to school and we had to wonder what was next and work through all of that. It's been a long time. I'm not saying this as a cop-out, but one of the good things is it's been a long time for the entire world. And I don't want people to carry the weight of that into this school year. If at all possible, take the time, get to know your kids, make sure they know they're safe at school and they have an adult that cares about them. And the curriculum will come, and we will have to do some things to modify our approach. We'll have to be smart about what we can do and what we can't. But the whole world, all levels of education, college down to pre-K and earlier, the whole world faced this interruption. And so we know that we had some things that we wanted to work on before the pandemic. We want to continue that work, use tools that maybe we learned about during the pandemic that may assist us, get families engaged, make sure our kids have, again, adults they can trust in the schools, and build that relationship to start the school year. I believe that to be the most important thing we can do, especially those first few weeks. Not to say there won't be any curriculum, but those first few weeks, we really want to build relationships and get things going. I'm a strong believer in taking the time to build relationships with students will pay off dividends down the road. When our kids have relationships with us and they feel safe with us and they trust us, there's nothing that will stop them. And I'm proud to say I work with tons of good educators in our community that are committed to that work. But to get back to the point, it's going to be a challenge, but we cannot expect our students to just zoom up to grade level. We can't expect our teachers to expedite pacing up to that level. We have to monitor the pace of the world and do our very best. Returning to school is going to be challenging. It'd be exciting, but challenging. And I want to focus on relationships and that SEL component first, and then finding ways to bridge the gaps. And we may not make it to that full grade 6 curriculum this year, and we might have to make adjustments as we go, or do some more pre-teaching in spots and find spots where we can move along, but without maybe teaching every single thing. That will be a challenge. I know so many teachers that they're keyed in and believe that their students need to know and be able to do every single thing in front of them. And we might have to make adjustments as we go. Maggie?
Have you guys considered anything along the lines of tracking the students? I know, like, as in putting them into different tracks. I know that has a lot of really negative connotations and potentially bad things, but I'm thinking that students are really coming in with such a, like, even more than normal, a wide range of experiences and needs. And just wondering if there's gonna be value, if there would be value in, rather than trying to, get them all in the same class and making the teachers go crazy trying to meet all those different needs, separating the students out by what those needs might be. And I guess I'm thinking specifically, I know my kid, like my youngest, who's one of those ones who's only ever really experienced school through a hybrid model, both needs a lot of help with learning how to make friends and stuff like that. But he spent last year incredibly bored because there was no sort of individualized instruction. It was all targeted to the kindergartners were basically taught the exact same thing all year long. And there were some areas where that was completely appropriate for him, and some areas where it was not what he needed. And I don't blame the teacher. Like she was working her, like crazy no matter what anyway. But I worry that if he has another year like that, it will, I'm already thinking it's going to take years to get him to a point where he thinks of school as something that's interesting and fun and worth his time. I think if he has 2 years where he just sits there completely bored, it's going to really, the lasting effects will just go on and on and on. And so, but I don't want to, overtask the teachers by saying they have to be everything to everyone. So has there been any consideration of kind of separating the students out more by their needs and what their experiences in this past year have been? Thanks. And thanks for just being open to having these kinds of conversations. It's clear you really care about the kids in the district a lot, and it's soothing. So thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And thank you for all of you for bringing up great questions. So I don't want to go education speak, but I do want to share a couple pieces. One is I do believe we have some pretty well-defined pathways for students, especially as they get through middle and into high school. But that may not resolve that problem or that concern at a much younger level. There is some gifted and talented opportunities, but I don't think that's the question you're asking. I just want to say that out loud, that pathways are very important to me. And I think that our kids all need as many pathways as we can build. Anything that will engage them and keep them engaged is a direction that we want to head. And we're doing some of that work in places like Next Step, where it's really about student engagement as a primary goal and well-being. And those pathways, they do kind of track students in different directions. From an education speak perspective, the word tracking became kind of taboo a while back, where there's some theories out there that accelerating students in one pocket creates a situation in which accelerated students are very focused and keyed on academic growth. And then those who are not are kind of left behind, or you create pockets of limited social interaction with peers who don't have comparable interests. And so it can become too narrow a scope, where you have students of only one particular, I don't want to stereotype, but one particular brand, if you will, that they are with those same folks for all of their classes, and they have very limited crossover to everybody else in the school that might be friends of theirs or could be friends of theirs. I also like the idea of classrooms where if you have students who are advanced, and this may not be popular to everyone, but I always liked the idea when I was in the classroom that advanced student could become a mentor in the classroom, or to find other opportunities built in and around the class that they could accelerate in other ways, where they could share their knowledge, where they could build social skills. But I really think we need to look at those dynamics, especially in the current times. And I'm hopeful that whichever school your student is at, you can communicate with them to say, what else do you have to engage my student who might be more advanced, especially in a particular area. We don't want to hold kids back, but I don't want to create an academic race where we have kids who we're trying to graduate a really well-rounded individual as best as we can. And I've seen it. I've seen students get off to that next level in college or in a program to get certifications or an associate's or beyond degree. And I've seen them have such a narrow focus on academics that when they get to the next level, they struggle to function in the world around them. And we want to do the best we can to make sure that they have those social skills. And I think in the last 16 months, I don't know what's happened to kids' social skills. It might have grown in some ways because of technology, but that interpersonal component, that ability to be in a space with others and have the courage to strike up a conversation, I'm really worried about that. I'm really worried about our kids, when they go to a job interview down the road, no matter what age they are, their comfort level to put their hand out and to look up and introduce themselves. So I do think that we want to make sure that whatever we do, we are not isolating an accelerated model, but we're dynamic enough to make sure that students have all of those skills that employers are saying they want. They want smart employees, absolutely, and universities too, but they want students who are going to follow those soft skill pieces, that ability to communicate with others, treat people well, and have confidence and communicate clearly. And I think that those are just some of those components. I want to make sure that if we have a student who's in class, particularly if one of your students is bored in class, what else could be happening in that space to allow them to expand their current horizons? And I know a lot of teachers do that work now. Just my 2 cents. Kira.
Hey there. I wanted to share something that might help answer that last question. The schedule for what the upcoming year would look like for my elementary school where I teach was sent out to us preliminarily. And it includes something called WIN time, which stands for what I need. And my understanding is that that's something across all the elementary schools in the district, just from what I gathered from the information I was given. And the cool thing about WIN time at the elementary level is that it is really flexibly grouped. There might be a group that focuses on social emotional learning, and their focus is on making friends or on anger management. There may be a group focusing on math skills, and the focus might be on understanding unit fractions. So if you have a group of students who most needs unit fractions, they're going to be put with a teacher during that, like, I think 40-ish minute block. And that's going to be the focus for, a couple of days, a week, a couple of weeks. But those groups are flexible. So students will be, it's not like a single group of students is going to be given the same set of interventions all year long. If a student most needs social emotional skills, they might be in that group for the beginning of the year, but they might be in a math focused group later in the year when the math focus is on a subject where they need support. So those groups will constantly change and be responsive to student needs. I don't know if anything like that is happening at the middle or high school level, but that is what I've learned so far about WIN time at the elementary level. And I'm really excited for that program to be able to see every student have a block of time that is purely dedicated to meeting their individual needs, as just a dedicated part of the school day. It's something I'm really excited about and I'm really looking forward to.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. Just so you know, I keep grabbing my phone. I'm taking notes because I'm sharing my screen and I can't do both things at one time. So I'm writing down some notes in my notes on my phone. I don't want you to think I'm texting when people are asking questions or bringing up great ideas. Maggie.
Thanks. I just want to follow up and clarify that I'm actually, like, I agree completely. I didn't know the word pathways. I agree completely about tracking generally, and about the deficits in the social emotional learning for, the kids that are put on a primarily accelerated academic track. And that's not actually, I'm not particularly interested in that for my I'm really talking about my youngest.
Okay.
Mostly he's in kindergarten. I think actually, if anything, the thing that he is going to struggle with the most is the making friends. I think he won't make friends well, like, just because of who he is personally. He won't make friends well if he is also bored. But I think the wins period that Kira's talking about sounds amazing and perfect. I guess I'm worried about it not actually happening, just because, last year our schools kept saying, oh, Wednesdays is going to be for small group breakout and Wednesdays will be for this. And it never happened. And again, I don't really blame the teachers. I know they were just crazy overworked, but I'm worried that essentially if that kind of thing happens again this year, because we get into a situation where it's all of a sudden you have to go remote or hybrid and it's all just crazy. And that the kids are really, really going to suffer. And I'm just thinking that, the students are coming in with such, I imagine, with really varied experiences from this past year. I think some of them were out, in antithesis to my kid, were out having time with their friends or with their relatives or their cousins or things like that. And so aren't struggling with that social emotional stuff as much. Some kids probably had relatives who have passed away. So there's so many different experiences, and that's, I don't know, if the teachers can do it, I'm impressed. That's amazing. And I know that they have in past years separated the kids into small groups or given extra enrichment here or there, or the things like you said, Jake, like saying, here, why don't you work on teaching this thing that, you know, you're doing well, but teach it to this other person and you'll both learn in the process even more. And I think it's normally great. Maybe I'm just a little sore after not happening at all last year, combined with just being, I guess I'm just worried about my kid is
Yeah.
all. So just wanted to clarify my point and also say thanks, Karen, and just put a plug in for that kind of thing really actually happening. Thanks.
Yeah, no, those are all excellent points, Maggie. I agree, and I took a note. We'll keep looking at that, and I don't say that to push you off. I say that because genuinely, I think that's good feedback. Any other questions? Oh, I see Maggie's hand. Was that because it's not down? Or Maggie, did you want to add something? Oh, okay. My screen just blinked. All right. If there's nothing further for now, I will click here to our next slide. Again, some key dates to highlight. I mentioned August 2nd, which is next Monday. That will be a pretty big agenda. We'll be talking about what at least at that point in time it will be to come back to school. We were so hopeful that the language in June, not saying it was right or wrong, would be the thing we could plan on, and we started to look at that. And then the language July 9th was a shift, and we had to consider that. And then today, things shifted on July 28th. And we have, as I mentioned, superintendent's having a meeting tomorrow with Dr. Shah from the CDC, and that should be helpful to at least provide some more guidance. And so anyway, Monday, August 2nd, I'll be bringing a recommendation to the school committee, and we'll go from there. I invite you to attend those remotely as you did tonight, or in person if you're comfortable doing so or available to do so. The next thing we'll have after that, we'll have a couple weeks where we do some work in getting geared up for school. Monday, August 16th, there is a school committee meeting, but it's for personnel to nominate folks that are going to be starting up the school year. And then immediately following that, we'd like to have our next community forum. And as topic shifts, I'll adjust the slides and probably have more conversation on the 16th that focuses on going back to school, if that seems appropriate. And if there are other topics you'd like to see here, please feel free to shoot me an email, or if you bump into me, let me know, and we'll get them added. I can't thank you all enough for your questions and your comments. Is very helpful. It really gets the brain flowing with some things that we need to be doing and considering in the work that we do. So I look forward to doing this again August 16th, and we'll have some more dates after that, and we'll go from there. Thank you very much for your time. Have a good evening.